The fuck is this? The fuck is this supposed to be? This shit needs the comedy tag, if anything. Dangan Ronpa as horror, in any part of the franchise, is a thought that I've never sat well with. What's really supposed to be remotely scary in the franchise? Loud sounds play when a body is discovered, but it's meant to be more of a shocking character death reveal than outright terrifying. Does anyone even think the horror elements are there in the first place, let alone good? The first game starts with a character being murdered, but if the over-the-topness of the rocket being sent into space followed by the fall back down to Earth before it's opened, No, 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 no. Regardless, if there's one entry in the franchise that may be trying for more of a tense atmosphere than the others, it sure as hell isn't Danganronpa 3, but rather Ultra Despair Girls. The prologue sets up Komaru's situation as she's forced to run about the freshly apocalypticized Toei City while being hunted by a kooky cabal of creepy children, what with their whimsical ease in massacring hundreds of the adults they brand demons through use of playful-looking barrow robots. Very playful. Being the player's primary lens into the world, Komaru's demeanor and mood is something that really never carries over into gameplay. Early on, she's in a constant state of terror as her world is upended and she's thrust into this horrible demon hunt against her will. When you're given a hacking gun to play around with, its endless bullets make short work of the easy enemies, even on the highest difficulty, but this is merely a taste of power that you can never quite replicate. But really, it's just a formality because even when you're reduced to having far less bullet options and given the ammo counter, the straightforward AI and slow movements of the Monokumas has them continue to act as child's play throughout 99% of the game, only changing during one final encounter at the end when the game throws dozens of the varying types at you in one go. It's practically effortless to run circles around them and get your shots off, and I've only ever played on the hardest difficulty. Komaru's terror is something made impossible to draw a connection to from gameplay to story despite both areas trying. Look, it's a new character almost identical to their relative, a character you're supposed to like from playing the first game. With that, and only that established, the game desperately tries to get you to care as this character you were just introduced to 5 minutes ago is fucking dead. The gameplay side is not much better. Your aim slowing your movement speed is normal, but the hacking gun is Komaru's only form of attack. Firing blind is not an option, and there's no melee attack to fall back on, or even a damaging bullet with infinite uses. Crowd control options are limited to select situations of enemies and placements, often very clearly signposted. The only option the player really has is a paralyzed bullet, which is much more effective when water is available, keeping it from being too useful next to its limited stock. The lack of options should push the player into running it safe and cautiously against some large odds, keeping their wits about them against a flood of enemies, thinning the herd carefully with limited resources. But even beyond their status as inconveniences rather than engaging or threatening encounters, the lackluster rewards for engaging with them render any time spent generally not worth it. You get coins and experience to upgrade your characters to make the already easy encounters even easier, and slot machines give you enough drops to get by as it is. So you kind of end up at a point where it's generally in your best interest to scoot on by encounters to the next cutscene where you won't be followed. This coupled with UFOs you shoot to regain your bearings because of the practically non-existent level design, and you get a game where the ideal way to play is to just kind of not play. Because the game really doesn't want you to play. It's a good thing that the strongest aspect of Ultra Despair Girls is in the characters because you're lucky to go for 10 minutes without some kind of cutscene or interruption. Especially if you go out of your way to get certain collectibles which give you a reward in the form of yet another cutscene. And these aren't short either. Ultra Despair Girls gives the Metal Gear series a run for its fucking money when it comes to the balance of gameplay and story. I'd be surprised if much more than 30% of my game time was spent on actual gameplay, and all too much of that was peppered with hints and further signposting that felt all too condescending. I suppose it shouldn't come as much of a surprise given that it's based on a visual novel, but if the gameplay change was meant to be a selling point, then why is it made to take a back seat to the rest of the narrative rather than serve as a centerpiece, or even work with it? And even if it's not there to be a centerpiece, then why couldn't it at least be somewhat fun? It serves as a break from the constant cutscenes and dialogue, but that was a purpose served in the visual novels with pretty much the bare minimum of control. Even if you want to go off and explore or just play, the game just can't let go of your hand, treating you like a child. As if coming off of a visual novel franchise, the developer has expected players would struggle with a genre that isn't really new at all. These are fundamental problems with the game. If you just want the story, then that's what easy mode is advertised as, but the label could apply to the whole game if you have the most basic level of competency and patience. But with this creepy enemy, Junk Monokuma being reduced to a few button prompts with some well-placed shots, it becomes clear that the problem with Ultra Despair Girls is that it's not a bad horror game, it's an action game that's so inept it comes across as the wrong genre entirely. Like trying to blend hope and despair into one, Ultra Despair Girls is the muddled mix of the disempowering genre of horror and the power fantasy of action. Komaru has limited options against swarms of simple enemies and cramped spaces, She's put into forced stealth segments with tougher encounters promised for failing. All of this is under the overall narrative of being hunted and killed like the countless bodies of those older and stronger than Komaru littering the streets. And yet, even when she's juxtaposed with the more action-centric genocider to pull her out of danger, it's hard to pretend the game is difficult enough to need her. Well-aimed shots increase your damage output and make it easier to clear crowds, and how well you complete tasks and explore is rated at the end of the level, challenging you to nail everything flawlessly like the action games it's trying to be. That is, in spite of a retry option that counts against your score if you use it, defeating the point of retrying everything to perfect your score. Yeah, I 100%ed this game 2 years ago and I'm still kinda mad about that. Really? The greatest sin of Ultra Despair Girls is that it can be so damn boring so much of the time. What little gameplay is there just isn't given either the polish or focus needed to be engaging. And the rest of the story is passable, but not quite enough to justify it. In the visual novels, yes, there is less gameplay, but it forces you to engage. Yes, you can get the gist of it through a Let's Play or something, but actually playing it forces you to pay attention to what's going on and what's being said as you figured out what happened in these kooky murders. It's easy, sure, but it still leads to satisfying moments when you click the evidence together, especially the first time through when some line of dialogue points out something you didn't notice, and it sets off that domino chain in your brain, allowing everything to fall into place. I will always remember that first moment when I realized Owada knew too much and finally got through my brief roadblock in the trial. There was nothing stunning about it from a gameplay perspective, but had I been outright told rather than forced to figure it out for myself, I might have never even finished the game and gotten into the franchise after the first trial where the name of the killer was literally written on the wall. Ultra Despair Girls never had a moment of satisfaction like that. The gameplay all just blends together in a swirl of mediocrity, padding, and tedium. It doesn't engage you in the story or characters that take up so much of your time because you barely need to play to get by, short of a few moments towards the end. It could have just as easily been a 12-episode anime spin-off or movie trilogy or something, and that's the worst thing you can say about any game. And that's kind of a shame because despite the flaws and general ineptness, Ultra Despair Girls is actually alright. Or at least there's enough good here to put it miles above pretty much every other spin-off in the franchise. Komaru and Fukawa play off each other amazingly, and those little cutscenes from finding the collectibles really are worth it. The Warriors of Hope are by and large tragic, with their histories of abuse to balance out the fun antics resulting in a memorable bunch of antagonists. There's not a whole lot to offer in the story. There's a motif of hope turning into despair coupled with the adult-child power dynamic, horrific abuse, and Komaru's empowering self-actualization that winds together into a climax of friendship? It's not terrible, but like the horror and action, none of it really blends together to form anything of meaning, especially as the game itself has been rendered meaningless by a certain future installment. Not a lot gets resolved in its own climax, and the epilogue goes on about some grand final battle between hope and despair that the stuff in Toa City was supposed to be preparation for, but Junko doesn't do shit after Dangan Ronpa 2, and neither did Monika really, so whoops, that didn't age well. Gotta love dropped plot points. It's worth at least a play if you're invested in the franchise, but on the whole, its hope of living up to the mainline games is just another path to despair. See, look, I can say hope and despair a bunch of times and pretend it actually means something. White despair and black hope? Shut the fuck up, you stupid bears. V3 is next. I know you've been waiting for it, but I want to talk about the rest of the franchise too, I'm sorry. I've been trying to replay V3, but there's another skeleton. Thanks to my patrons, such as Vladimir's, Mathwiz, Volkion, and Peter Cairns for fighting against the impending skeleton army, and you can join the fight through that link right over there.